Welcome to the Ask MNLCT webinar series. But before we begin, I would like to ask Shelley DeMello to proceed with the acknowledgement of the land. Please, Shelley, if you want to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. I would like to begin our time together by acknowledging that we live and work on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations across Turtle Island. While we meet today on a virtual platform, it is important to acknowledge that the lands in our treaty obligations are important. From our eastern to our western shores, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. We also affirm our commitment and responsibility to improve our own understanding of Indigenous peoples, their cultures, and their histories. With guests joining us from across Turtle Island today, we ask that everyone take a moment to find out which land or which unceded or treaty territories you live, work, play, and learn on. You can use the link www.native-land.com to learn more. I am presenting to you today from Brampton, Ontario, and I acknowledge that the land on which I gather with you and which the region of Peel operates is part of the treaty lands and Treaty of the Mississauga of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land. In particular, I acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I acknowledge that personally, as an immigrant with an ancestral history of colonization, and as a direct descendant of indentured laborers in the West Indies, I am a settler. But I'm also a welcome guest to Turtle Island, and I am grateful for the opportunity to work, live, learn, and play on this land. And by doing so, I give my respect and gratitude to all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people. Thank you. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Shelley. Well, I'm Marta Juarez, Settlement Program Manager at the Mennonite Life Center of Toronto and co-manager of the Counter Human Trafficking Program at Aurora House, and I will be moderating this webinar today. Ask MNLCT is a monthly live webinar hosted by the Mennonite Life Center of Toronto, where we talk about current issues. And the topics we touch are aimed to support the journey of newcomers, refugees, and other vulnerable individuals in Canada. MNLCT offers diverse programming and services such as settlement, language, mental health, and bridging programs. Today's topic is on human trafficking. And with us today, we have a team of professionals whose dedication and passion to get the word out about the issue of human trafficking goes above and beyond. We have with us Shelley DeMello, Executive Director at the Mennonite Life Center of Toronto, co-founder of Aurora House, and former member of its board. We also have Shankari Valendra, Program Coordinator at Aurora House. Aurora House is a transitional housing for human trafficking survivors. And we have Judith Herrera, Aurora House case manager and mental health counselor who provides ongoing support to human trafficking survivors. We have a guest speaker today as well. Today we have Cheryl Pereira, award-winning activist, who is also the founder of OneChild, an organization against the sexual exploitation of children. Today, we also have a team of translators and interpreters in Arabic, Spanish, and Mandarin. If you want to make a question throughout the webinar, please post the questions on the Q&A, and you can also raise your hand if you want to speak so we can unmute you. Otherwise, all mics are going to be muted. Okay, so thank you everybody for being here today. Understanding human trafficking in Canada. This is the topic that we are going to be approaching today. And to start with this, let us start by defining the topic. What is human trafficking? Where does it happen? And I would like to address this question specifically to Shelley, so we can start the conversation. You are on mute, Shelley.
I owe $1 in the unmute jar. Thank you, Martha, very much for the introduction, for the opportunity to sit on this panel this afternoon, and to share the work of both Aurora House and the Mennonite New Life Center with regards to human trafficking, the eradication of human trafficking or modern slavery here in Canada. In the work that the center does, human trafficking or modern slavery for us is a human rights violation characterized by economic exploitation of people by force, fraud, or coercion. And it exists in many parts of our economy, and it's often hidden because clearly of its criminal nature, where those who are trafficked don't even necessarily identify as being trafficked. There's no one profile of perpetrators. It could be your cousin, it could be a stranger, it could be organized crime. But that's kind of the working definition here at the center and at Aurora House. But there are better definitions and more exploratory ones that I can share, and these can be found in different places. I know we've got a number of partner organizations on the call today, so feel free to tap into some of the resources we'll be sharing today. One that connects, I think, on a number of different layers actually comes from the federal government's Department of Justice. And it states that human trafficking involves the recruitment, the transportation, harboring, and or the exercising of control, direction, or influence over the movement of a person in order to exploit that person, typically through sexual exploitation or forced labor. And it's often described alternatively as a modern form of slavery. And if I can just take us on a bit of a journey, while the Criminal Code of Canada states that human trafficking is a serious criminal offense, back in 2002, Canada, based upon an adopted definition outlined in the Palermo Protocol, also known as, let's see if I get this right, the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. They define trafficking as needing to have 3 independent elements to be present in order to constitute a trafficking crime or offense. And those 3 independent elements, if you will, include the act, that is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, again, harboring, receivings of persons. So that's the act of trafficking. There also needs to be the means. And that is defined as or exemplified by the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, a position of vulnerability, giving or receiving of payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person and therefore having control over another person. And then finally, the third element is this idea of purpose, that the exploitation in and of itself, at a very minimum, includes, if I will, the prostitution of others, and it's their words, not mine, the prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor, or services. It also includes slavery practices similar to slavery, servitude, and even the removal of organs. So all the work that is being done at all levels of government and in community agencies across the country, there's a defined purpose to eradicate human trafficking in Canada. And for me, it sits on the shoulders of these theoretical definitions, if you will, as a starting place to examine the perpetration of modern slavery in Canada. For those of us who might, be wanting to understand further trafficking in Canada, hence our Ask MNLCT session this morning. My first learnings came from a number of different sources, and it's a study conducted by the Alliance Against Modern Slavery. It was actually published first in 2014, and it was the starting point, the jumping off point for the Mennonite New Life Center and Aurora House's work in identifying instances of trafficking within the communities we served. And it shows that many Canadians will assume that human trafficking is only something that affects international victims. And anyway, really quickly, I know I've maybe gone beyond just definition, but with definition,
we're going to get to the roles of Aurora House and MNLCT and OneChild as well, and we're going to talk about the history. Why don't we wait there a little bit, because you touched something very important, Shelley, and you talked about the financial gain. Mentioned that. And it was a very quick comment, but I think it's important to in this case invite Cheryl to the conversation. So we talk about why does an activity such as human trafficking exist? Is it simply for the economic gain? And if so, what can we do to disrupt the financial chain of human trafficking? So Cheryl, if you want to start, and then Shelley, you can add there. Thank you.
Thanks, Martha. So I'm going to speak a little bit about sex trafficking in particular, and from the children's perspective, because that's the area that we work with at OneChild. So when you ask the question, why does human trafficking exist? Why do we have this? It's a very loaded question. And I think there are kind of a number of factors that kind of come together to kind of make this perfect storm. So first, is that we have the supply of children who are desperate and vulnerable. And in many cases, that's fueled by powerful forces like poverty, generational trauma, historic oppression, discrimination, including gender inequity. And then you factor in the mental health crisis we have in our hands. And then you factor in the fact that we have an uninformed and an ill-informed population. Then you add in powerful social norms and harmful attitudes that are at play, like those that perpetuate toxic masculinity, which leads to the objectification of women and children and purchasing their bodies. Then there are those that kind of dictate how men and boys should act. They should be tough, or that that all sexual attention is good attention. These type of norms, they prevent male victims, for instance, from even realizing that they're victims in the first place or coming forward with their experiences and seeking help. And then there's those social norms that glamorize mass consumerism. We need to buy and buy and buy and keep up with the Jonases. There's the ones that perpetuate, stripper culture and the whole phenomenon of sugar daddies. Then there are those that glorify money and getting money fast. If you're a young boy and you have limited options, you have no positive role models, and someone comes to you and offers you friendship, brotherhood, and an opportunity to make money fast by selling other human beings, why wouldn't you do it? And then there's a fact that traffickers and buyers, they operate without facing justice because law enforcement is oftentimes just a step behind them. Technology is constantly changing, and it's difficult to keep up with the new platforms that traffickers are using to groom and to sell children. So all these factors, they come together to kind of create this perfect storm. And to answer your question about economic gain, I think that's definitely part of it, but I'd also add in power. When you go out and you purchase someone, especially a child, and they're considered just a commodity. They're just an object to the buyer. Often buyers, they feel that they can live out their violent fantasies on their victims, and especially children in particular, they don't have the capacities or the faculties to know the difference or to fight back. And perpetrators know this. So I think the way that we're going to dismantle this forever is by cutting off the supply, by targeting the root causes of trafficking, which is inequity, educating the public and the most vulnerable about trafficking and the tactics used by traffickers, and cutting off the demand by changing these harmful social norms that perpetuate buying human beings, especially women and girls. I think this is the only way, but this is going to take time.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Shelley, I know you're very passionate about this topic too, and I know that you have lots of answers for us today. So can you please jump in and provide us with your input as well?
I mean, Cheryl's given such an, really great overview as to how to, disrupt the supply chain, if you will. And I started off by saying, there's economic gain, and I agree fully that it's not just economic, but a power over someone that also exists. But this economic component to it, I think within our teams here at Aurora House and MNLCT, you'll often hear me say, part of our work is to disrupt the supply chain. And Cheryl just talked about, this toxic masculinity and awareness and advocacy building as a way to disrupt demand. So we have this need to build awareness, and oftentimes it's not that we don't know that we need to do that, but what does that look like? And maybe I can punctuate Cheryl's answer with some examples. Earlier this year, I attended the annual HARPA conference. That's the annual Human Resources Professional Conference. It was held in January before all the lockdowns happened in March. And at this conference, they talked about work being done in a number of different spaces. Specifically, one that stands out for me is one that partners non-traditional organizations together. Tamia Nagy, who is a national bestseller, the founder of Walk With Me, and is a survivor. She has been working with TD Bank to follow the money, if you will. The House of Commons report issued or presented back in 2018, a report on, I think it was called Moving Forward in the Fight Against Human Trafficking in Canada, lists 17 recommendations, and of which one of those is to use financial reporting mechanisms to follow this money, to follow the money as it flows through, a legitimized system. So while I don't have all the detailed information about Ms. Nagy's and TD Bank's project outcomes, it does, however, fit in the recommendations of the government's recommendations to use tools like FinTrack, and FinTrack is Financial Transactions Report Analysis Center of Canada. Sorry, lots of acronyms, my apologies. But it's an approach to develop and implement an effective program that assists financial institutions and money services businesses to detect suspicious financial transactions that could be related to human trafficking, and then use that information to arm prosecutors in investigations. Another example, and I know time's short, I'll be really quick, is a victim to survivor to leadership model that is being used in the United States through an organization called Girls Educational and Mentoring Services. And they explore the stigmatization that surrounds having been trafficked, and how moving from victim to leader is a possible step towards disrupting the supply chain, because those who had been trafficked understand what their experience has been, and there's a powerfulness, one of their regaining their power and their voice, and two, by being able to name the systems that perpetrators use. So yeah. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Shelley. There's a question coming in, and I would like to address it now. The question is, it's open to all the panelists here. What is the relationship between sex trafficking and the pornography industry in Canada? What do you think? Who wants to tackle this question? Probably Cheryl. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. So we're seeing, I mean, if we have looked over articles in the newspaper over the past few days, there has been quite a bit of attention on the website Pornhub. And the fact that there have been survivors of trafficking whose exploitation and abuse has been live streamed on the website. And people are, going on and assuming they're watching they're frequenting Pornhub and thinking, oh, these people, all these women and girls are doing it out of their own free will. It's their own agency, but in reality, we have these videos and evidence of their abuse on these websites. Pornography also plays a very powerful role in kind of feeding the demand, right? It's all about, sexualizing and objectifying women and girls. And so this kind of also, feeds that demand for young women and girls. So when you're constantly exposed to this, you eventually go out and seek and buy, individuals and try to act out the things that you see on these pornographic videos. So there's definitely a connection there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're going to go to another question, and then I'm going to come back to you, Shelley, because I think there's a lot to talk about the financial chain and everything that we can do or we cannot do. So I'm going to come back to you. And for now, I would like to ask a question to Shankari specifically. There is a misconception that human trafficking exists in other countries, but not in Canada. And the fact is that human trafficking is a worldwide problem, and it exists right here in Canada. And it's probably happening right now in our neighborhoods as we speak. So to what extent is human trafficking a prevalent issue in this country?
Thank you, Martha. Hi, everyone. My name is Shankari Balendra. I'm the program coordinator for Aurora House. Aurora House is a transitional house for survivors of human trafficking. To answer your question, Martha, when I want to answer this, I want to have some backup information, like supportive information. And it could be data, client stories, and the work what we do in community agencies as frontline workers. So when I look at data from the Stats Canada, it says since there is some data which was collected from 2009 until 2018, there were around 1,700 cases of police reported human trafficking cases. So these are reported to the police, and we all know that it doesn't happen all the time, and there are vulnerable communities who would not report to the police due to many situations, such as fearful of their life, being harmed by the traffickers, distrustful of authorities because they will think that they will think about their family, what will happen to their family, the economic status, financial benefits, what they were receiving before. So all those factors will prevent them from reporting. So these numbers are reported by the Stats Canada. And if we think about the victims, do like a gender analysis, 97% of the time it was women who were trafficked. And if we look at the age range of the victims, it's for anyone between under 18 to 24, it's about almost 75% of the time the victims were between that age range. And 81% of the time the accused persons were men. And also we know that 92% of the time, human trafficking victims, they knew their trafficker. So these are all some data which back up or which show that there is human trafficking happening in Canada. Not only that, there is more powerful stories which we hear from our clients. Like Mennonite New Life Center and at Aurora House, we see clients at Mennonite New Life Center as a frontline worker, Judith works, and the clients she meets, the stories they share. Sometimes human trafficking, it's not only happening in other countries, but what happened in another country, it comes back, and it's a vicious circle. It happens again in Canada. Clients are re-victimized. Even at Aurora House, the stories what we hear, like there was a statement by one of the residents who said, the life I lived, I thought it's normal. And then until one day I realized it's not normal in Canada and I have my rights. So she came out, asked for help, seek help. So these are some data, some client stories, which I can share to say that human trafficking is happening in Canada, as sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and all other forms. And we have to, as community agencies, we are all working towards to eradicate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Shankari. We have a question. One of our attendees wants to make a question. So maybe if we can unmute.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you. Please
so
go
I
ahead
wanted,
with your question.
I wanted to say the silent victims of boys that are trafficked. I was almost trafficked under sexual pretenses myself here in Toronto. And I wanted to say that USA Today on February 8, 2018, said that in 2016, 36% of boys were trafficked. And according to the John Jay School of Criminal Justice, in 2008, 45% of those trafficked in New York were boys, 45%. There is a treatment center as well in North Carolina for trafficked boys, and it is called Restore by Chris Smith and his wife run that. And there's tens of thousands of silent victims that are of boys that are trafficked.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for trusting us and for sharing your story. Do you have a specific question?
I wanted to mention that because I'm of course I acknowledge that a lot of girls are trafficked, but there was not much mention made of boys. That's why I mentioned those statistics and all that.
Exactly.
Because it is very, very sad. And even there are even women that use those traffic services. It was in that same article mentioning that women also procure boys as well.
Yeah, of course. And you know what, Cheryl Pereira, she has experience in this specific topic regarding boys being trafficked, and the fact that the situation with boys is not really as acknowledged as when it happens with a girl. So Cheryl, if you can just provide your input on this comment, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. I think boys are definitely have become the silent victims, and because again these constructions around manhood and having to be tough and strong, oftentimes boys don't even realize that they're being victims, or they're afraid, or there's a stigma around coming forward and saying that they're victims. So at OneChild, we've been thinking about boys for many years. And what we're trying to do now is to talk with some survivors, male survivors of sex trafficking, to come up with some sort of program that would work with boys in particular, to kind of explore these conceptions of manhood, and kind of unpack those, so that there isn't this kind of stigma, and boys feel able and comfortable to be able to come forward and say that they have been a victim of sexual exploitation or trafficking. So this is one area, but absolutely, I 100% agree with you that this is an area we focus so much on girls, and of course the evidence points that girls are the majority, but in the process we've kind of left the shadow on boys, and now that awareness in general is starting to grow about human trafficking, now there really needs to be that spotlight on how it's affecting boys. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Martha,
Yes,
can I add something to that?
Oh, absolutely. Please go ahead, Shelley.
Thank you. You speak a very important truth, and sharing that data and these articles and resources only widen our viewpoint in terms of just how hidden trafficking is. And when we, the center conducted a case management gap study a few years ago that looked at trafficking, and what came out of that study was that the prevalence on resources towards those that are sexually exploited or trafficked for sexual purposes often doesn't look at the full gambit of trafficking. And where men tend to get bucketed is, and again, I'm not an expert, but from the reading from the literature review pieces, state that a lot of men are trafficked for labor, construction, agriculture, et cetera, but having these conversations tear down these silos of where we put people even within this construct of trafficking and this real experience of exploitation. So I just wanted to add that kind of lens to it, and thank you for sharing that perspective.
No, my pleasure. I speak on behalf of all the boy victims out there, and boys that have been sexually assaulted and sexually abused, and have even been, and those that have been abused in other ways as well.
Yeah, there's a gender-based analysis lens, and I think Cheryl hit on something very important earlier on, which is that there exists structural inequalities that have very strong gender-based roots, racism, poverty, et cetera. So it's about having these conversations and uncovering, like you said silent voices. It is hidden, and it's hidden in many structural constructs. So that conversation needs to continue.
Yeah, of course, I acknowledge that a lot of women are trafficked, but yes. I was just so shocked when I was researching this a little bit to find out that in 2008, 45% of those trafficked in New York were boys. And when I heard that there is a center to help them recover in North Carolina called Restore, it moved me. Sorry.
Don't be sorry. Okay. We thank you. We thank you for your bravery.
It was just hard to finish off the sentence.
No, it's okay.
Yes.
It's okay. Take your time. And if I mean, all these resources that you are sharing with us, and not only with us, with all those people attending this webinar, are very, very valuable. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for sharing your experience as well. We really appreciate it, and this is what it's all about, right?
And of course, I acknowledge all the women victims. Of course, having been a feminist most of my life as well, and being very sensitive to trauma as a trauma survivor. Of course, I acknowledge the multitude of female victims and so on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your participation in this webinar, for providing us with all this information. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if there is something else, any other comment or question, please reach out to us, and we will follow up with you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can also, sorry, if I could just add, if you're still on the call, like I said, we've been talking and thinking about boys for a very long time at OneChild. If you go onto our website, www.onechild.ca, we have a section specifically for boys and men that talk about the issue affecting boys. And I'll talk a little bit later about the work that we do in schools. But when we go and give our presentations in schools, we talk to young boys in the audience and say, hey, this isn't just a women's issue or a girl's issue. Boys are also victims. So this is something that we're trying to start to create this dialogue and get this awareness going. But I think we're all still at the very beginning, though. But I just wanted to let you know that we're starting the conversation at OneChild.
Thank you. I'm so glad OneChild exists.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, just
Thank you,
adding to what everyone has
Yes, Judith.
said. Yes, anyone can fall, prey to human trafficking, but traffickers aim to vulnerability. So people who are more vulnerable, that's where they exploit. So regardless of the gender, and yes, the more a life is compounding of multiple layers of vulnerabilities, that's the likelihood of someone being trafficked increases. So yes, no one is exempt. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. Stay there, because I have another question regarding awareness, and you can help us with this, Judith. How much awareness is needed to?
Yes, I think yes, people are more aware, but not enough. I think there's much more work to be done, because I think yes, the education still is the key. So the more updated we are with the information, the government, organizations and research are done, is the best. So that's still the way to go, to be educated and well informed, and to be aware, not only at work, but also within our family, within our group of friends, because I think people still think that Canada is immune to this phenomenon. I think there's still a lot to be done.
And as a follow-up question for you, Judith, how does awareness impact the work you do as a case manager, specifically?
Okay, yes. Well, if let's say someone, of course, we need to know and be aware of the signs. And if I mean, red flags are indicators. They are not determining that there is a human trafficking case exists, but it's a sign that we should explore more. So we need to know what to look when we are in front of someone, and if we think there is some red flags, we should explore more. And let's say if we are in front of someone who is an immigrant, and as I said, not have a immigration status, still is uncertain. And we know the working conditions are not good, and we start to explore there. So the more information we can give that client about workers' right, not me, but I refer them to the settlement team so they can do that, but be aware to spot whatever they are saying that doesn't match what we know it's a safe work environment, right? If they're working long hours, let's say, or if we know that they live in the same place that they work, and if there's something that we see that's not matching, because they don't know about the laws here if they are newcomers, right?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Judith. And I would like to now go back to you, Shelley, about the original thought that you had in terms of the role of both MNLCT and Aurora House in counter human trafficking. And if you can talk a little bit about MNLCT's history and its connection to human trafficking, and the conversation or the conception of Aurora House, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. There's lots I'd love to share. So Martha, please keep me to proper time, because it's not a quick story. Really, right off the top, the Mennonite New Life Center is a settlement agency. We support newcomer and immigrant integration. What that really boils down to, if you will, is us walking together with our program clients to help make Canada home. And what we realized during some of our sessions and work with our clients was that our clients were coming through presenting situations where I think instinctually over our long history of working with clients, the things that just didn't make sense. And we heard Judy talk about some of the, warning signs, the indicators, not necessarily just a diagnosis, but there are certain warning signs, things where we would see a client come in and they're being controlled by others, being escorted all the time, they don't have access to their documents or their IDs or any of their possessions, or that when we first meet them, they're really anxious and fearful, maybe inappropriately dressed. And then we meet them again and, there's a change in appearance, more, again, inappropriate dress, but this time with a lot more resources. And, there were other things that, the fact that, people might be in employment relationships or marriages and not actually realizing that they are in a relationship with a trafficker. It could be a boyfriend, a friend. So there was many signs, I think, in our work that our counselors were experiencing, that where 1 and 1 didn't make 2, and we didn't exactly know what this was about. So our journey as an immigrant serving agency eventually led us to a place of exploration and wanting to understand more about what we were seeing. And I was referring right at the very beginning to a report done by the Alliance Against Modern Slavery. And that really was our springboard into understanding this hidden crime of trafficking. And I encourage everyone on the call, if you're just starting off in this place of wanting to know better what the lay of the land is and services, your clients' experiences, this is a really great resource, I think, that the center used at the time. And it was published back in 2014, and the study looked at 551 cases of human trafficking that were reported in the study in Ontario. And we were talking about some stats. Some of the things that were highlighted for us quite immediately was that 62% or almost 63% of those trafficked either through or from Ontario were Canadian citizens. And that 90% were female, of which that 90%, 63% were between the ages of 15 and 24. Now, these are stats back from like I said, the study back in 2014. There are much more updated statistics and includes a much broader gender-based analysis to the work. But this was our springboard. This was Mennonite New Life Center's springboard, and we worked at the time with visionary Christine Langschmidt, who eventually reached out to the Mennonite New Life Center with an idea to create a transitional home, a place of transition for those survivors of trafficking who need to create a life outside of their traumatized or trafficked experience. So this really became the partnership of the work that the center does with Aurora House. Aurora House provides, if you will, wraparound holistic services for the residents in this transitional home to access services while they think through and they experience a safe place to be and to transition from trafficking. And the center, in partnership with Aurora House, works at a case management and a mental health support level to make that journey, that pathway possible for those residents living at Aurora House. Above and beyond just that partnership, the center works quite vastly with survivors of trafficking, those again who are looking to create a life that is free from or that is not part of their trafficking past. I could say lots more, but I think I'll stop there.
Okay, so I know there's lots more to say, but I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on your own journey through this transition from MNLCT to Aurora House. I think that part is important too, in the sense that what if other organizations are thinking on engaging into this path and they don't know where to start or what to do? So if you can elaborate on that, I think that would be great, Shelley.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, there's something to be told about the journey the Mennonite New Life Center went on. You know, there was a moment in time, I think, in the leadership of the organization where we recognized that we were working with communities who, you know, I think Judy said it, you know, that we're experiencing marginalization, multiple barriers, and this made them, you know, put them potentially in a higher risk category. So as an organization, working with newcomers, recognizing that trafficking happens globally, not just abroad, but here as well in Canada, we made the decision as an organization to explore further the instances of trafficking that might exist within the communities we were working with. So it started from a place of needs and gaps at the center. And my role in that, you know, as any executive director, I think would say, is to not assume, not to create hypotheses that lead to potential, you know, assumptions and endings, but to explore. So our journey to working in partnership with Aurora House was multifaceted. Myself and Christine Langsmith, who is one of the co-founders of Aurora House, you know, the story is her and I ended up in a room together thinking, what can we do? Where can we pool our resources together? And, you know, we looked at the strengths of both organizations, you know, the fact that Aurora House had a safe place, a home that, a place that could be turned into something that you would call a home for those transitioning out of trafficking. And that the center had such a vast experience of a trauma-informed work, and coupling that together was where, you know, we springboarded into working frontline in helping those transitioning. But there is a wider spectrum of work, multitudes of organizations working together, because this isn't a siloed approach. It requires, you know, on the spectrum of services, coordination between law enforcement, legal, shelters, crisis organizations, and from that spectrum out to where Aurora House and the Mennonite New Life Center sit on transition. And, you know, Cheryl and her work at OneChild, working with youth specifically, you know, I love their tagline. And Cheryl, I apologize if I don't get it fully right, but, you know, one child being trafficked is one child too many. It resonates on so many different levels. So it isn't just our work, it's a spectrum of organized, thoughtful, intentional action that hopefully gets rolled up into you know, the policies that exist at a federal, provincial, and municipal levels. Nothing's perfect, but you know, from the report from the Alliance Against Modern Slavery in 2014 to where we are today, it continues to move forward, which is, I think, the important takeaway. All right, I'll end there.
Yeah, no, I wish we had more time to talk about all these details, but thank you, Shelley. We have Mason. She would like to ask a question or make a comment. So Mason Al-Rawi, Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to ask about the victims. Like, do they imprison them, and how do they get out and tell the world that they were victimized by those predators, let's say, or the traffickers? This is one question. And the other one, do you think the rehab after they have been tortured and been used and trafficked badly in sex, do you think the rehab will recover them? I think their life is going to be messed up the whole, until the end. I don't want to, because I have, my prayers always with them. I see a lot of documentaries about this before this webinar, and I keep thinking about them. Maybe I'm too much emotional or something, I don't know, but I keep thinking about them. So I would like to know about the victims after, how do they reach to the Aurora, or how do they reach to the help and get it? That's my
No. Well, those are two excellent questions, Mason. Maybe we can go to Judith and Shankari for now, if you want to answer those questions or one of those questions. And then if you want to elaborate on that, Shelly, that would be helpful too. But please go ahead, Shankari, then Judith, and then Shelly, if there is something else to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mason, for asking this question. Really appreciate it. Aurora House is a second stage transitional house. So what we do is provide housing and supportive services for survivors of human trafficking. I'm going to use word survivors to respect the residents of our house. And so as you know, we will be sharing some information about the website, a phone line to contact, and to reach Aurora House. There are other resources for any victims of human trafficking to call. There's a national hotline to contact, which we will be posting soon as well. And in that national hotline, you can access information in different languages. Definitely Arabic and many important languages spoken in Canada are available there. So that is one resource. And in Ontario, there are shelters, many shelters who provide specialized services for victims of human trafficking. Coming back to Aurora House, in Aurora House, in order to get a place at Aurora House, there is an intake process. After the intake process, a resident has to meet certain eligibility criteria. The important point here, we want to help everyone, but we also want to show that this is what we have at Aurora House. It's in a residential area. It's the second stage housing facility for people who are going through the transition. So we have certain resources. So we want to go through a screening process before we accept anyone. When residents come to Aurora House, they live a life of independence. They live independently there. There is a support staff, live-in housing support worker to provide any support required. And then Judith and the partnership Aurora House has with Mennonite New Life Center comes into play, where we provide wraparound services. I will ask Judith to talk more about the services, what we provide, but this is the services we provide at Aurora House. Thank you.
Oh, yeah,
Please
well, and yes, answering what the person, I don't see the name. Yes. Just asked. In fact, yes, we agree that it requires a long time recovery process. But what we provide in Aurora House is the beginning. Once they feel, like Shelly said, Aurora House as a home, that's the starting point, because without feeling safe, we cannot talk about recovery. So providing that shelter and that safety, that sense of belonging, then trust can be work upon. And also once that's along the way, that's already built, we can start empowering. Like we believe that as a human right approach, we work with a human right approach. The survivor needs to be given back that sense of power. So they are the ones who are going to prioritize what are the needs to be met and how we can plan an action plan, and we work from there. But first, as I said, safety and a sense of belonging, a sense of trust, and from there. And another thing that I wanted to say is the brain has plasticity. So yes, there is a hope of recovery. It takes a long time, but it's possible. Of course, always from a trauma-informed approach.
If I can add one sentence. So residents coming into Aurora House, getting the case management support from Judith, the caseworker. And in this year, I can say here, Aurora House had 3 residents who successfully transitioned into permanent housing. And there is one powerful statement I hear from a resident, past resident, who has moved out. She said, I was a victim. I was a victim, and now I am victorious, in her own language with the limited English. I am from a victim to victorious. So I would like to share that here, that it is possible that a change and transition can happen. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Shankari. Thank you. You did, Shelley, if you want to add to what it was already said. And there's one question coming in. Does Aurora House help boys?
I think, Shankari and Judy spoke quite extensively and eloquently about that work. I'm seeing in the chat that Maysoon is asking, how do we reach the house though? How do they escape from captives, from the perpetrators? And I'll just speak again to that spectrum of care. There is a spectrum, Maysoon. So where Mennonite New Life Center and Aurora House, if you think about it as a circle of care, maybe, on that circle, Mennonite New Life Center and Aurora House works with those who are ready to transition. Someone, though, in crisis, meaning needing to leave, needing needing medical attention, is in a safety or security risk standpoint, there are organizations well placed in crisis to be able to help. I don't have the statistics, but again, our training, our jumping off point at the center was learning that law enforcement plays a very big part. Them having the awareness and the education around being able to identify that an individual is being trafficked is one of the first places. And then law enforcement being able to connect that individual to supports. That could be shelters, that could be crisis intervention, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of, how does someone escape? There is large bodies of work around that, but some of the first actors, if you will, supports that exist, sit on that circle of care at that end of the spectrum. I'm wondering though, Cheryl and OneChild has this, works very extensively with youth and maybe has more to add to that piece around how does someone leave a captive situation, especially for youth who don't always have all the tools or full agency to know what the situation might be.
Mm-hmm.
And Cheryl, if you can add as well, how easy it is for vulnerable youth to get trafficked, and probably some signs of that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, so we do presentations in schools, and in our presentations we give the signs that or the recruitment tactics that are used by traffickers to groom and lure their victims. When we give presentations, as a result, we do have young people who come to us and say, I'm being trafficked, or I think I know somebody who's being trafficked. In the past, we've worked with an organization in Toronto called East Metro Youth Services to provide a trauma counselor to talk with those young people right after the presentation and to get them the support that they need. So that's how they are able to kind of get out of it and get connected to services and law enforcement as well. So that's one area, and I can talk a little bit more about the program a bit later. And then your question again, sorry, Martha, what was the initial question you had?
How easy it is for vulnerable youth to get trafficked?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very easy as long as there is a vulnerability. So whether it's they're homeless or they're a runaway, they're LGBTQ, they are Black or Indigenous, or of course there's the intersectional approach, and they may have many layers of these identities. When they have that vulnerability plus a lack of information or the wrong information, they are very much poised to be trafficked. And so that's why through our work in schools and other youth spaces, we're trying to kind of break that lack of knowledge and trying to raise the capacity of young people to protect themselves and their peers.
No, thank you,
Another
talking.
thing I wanted to share, Shelly mentioned, yes, the first, because I think we didn't answer completely the question about how the survivors, once they escape the traffic situation, are to be rescued. So one of the way Shelly mentioned is the police enforcement. There is a police enforcement team, but also I was thinking not mental health, I mean health in general, health practitioners are sometimes the ones who also are the ones who, can spot the signs and report and call the police. And that's why it's so important to become familiar with that hotline number, the national Canada hotline, human trafficking hotline number. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
But we will be adding it to the chat.
And now that you are talking about signs, Judith, how do we spot those signs?
Okay,
what signs should we be looking for?
Some of them we have already discussed. We are going to be sharing a long list of them, but in case if we are talking about human trafficking, labor trafficking, if someone is not getting paid at work, or they cannot leave the current work, if they lack of ID, either passport or any ID, if they have a debt bondage with the employer, if they appear to be extremely anxious, if they avoid eye contact, there are many. And then when it comes to sexual exploitation, if I witness with some of our residents, if they have some branding, if they also have a boyfriend who is very controlling, if there are plenty that we need to become aware of.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Judith. Can we go back to the resources, and let's say that someone spots those signs? What do we do? Either an individual or a community organization, if they suspect that a person is being trafficked, where do they go? Who do they call? And this question, I would like to send it to Cheryl and Shankari in this case. Cheryl first.
I think Shankari is probably best to answer this question, if you don't mind, Shankari.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
Go ahead, please, Shankari.
Yeah, sure. So I think we talked a bit about where to get help. My wish because I worked as a frontline worker before, frontline workers are the first contact point for many times, especially newcomers or vulnerable communities. They come to us asking for help with something else, probably housing, probably immigration matters. But as frontline workers, we need to educate ourselves, listen more, and ask more questions about why they are coming to you. It could be just an immigration matter, but the client doesn't have the immigration documents. So look for those signs. Clients may not have money, and always depending on another person, an unrelated person, asking for information, asking for financial resources. Look for these signs. In schools, guidance counselors, teachers, educate yourself, get informed, connect with a community agency like us, because we don't have to go into advanced level of learning about human trafficking, sex trafficking, the data and numbers. We just need simple information to identify the signs in our clients. So that's my wish as a frontline worker. It should start from there.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if people have recognized or if they know that there is human trafficking happening, sex trafficking or labor trafficking, we have shared some resources already. There's a national hotline. There are a lot of shelters. And when I say a shelter, there are different levels of shelters. Like many times I get calls to Aurora House for emergency shelter. We are not an emergency shelter. So there are separate shelters. Always call somewhere. Definitely the agency staff will be direct you at the right place. And we can share a list of shelters, women's shelters and other facilities available in Ontario. It's available. And I would suggest, once you identify the signs, frontline workers, teachers, and parents. So that's another important one. Parents having teenage children, look for the signs, look for the change in their behavior, and ask for help. And community agencies like us are there to help you in any way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shankari. And I think I'm going to go back to you, Cheryl, again. Because you didn't get to share the story about how OneChild came about. Mm-hmm. So if you can tell us a little bit about that, we would be appreciated.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Well, you know, I have been doing this work for the past 18 years. I started very young when I was a teenager. Basically, I learned about the sexual exploitation of children, and actually it was about boys in particular that I learned about in Bangkok, Thailand, and while I was just researching for a high school project. So I came across this issue, and the fact that children my age and younger were being exploited in this way it just blew my mind. That there was an organized industry around the rape of children. And I remember not being able to sleep and, you know, being so angry, but also realizing getting angry isn't going to change the situation for these kids. I have to do something. I don't care that I'm just a kid myself. I'm going to do something. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. And, you know, I started researching, and, you know, in my research, I learned my parents are originally from Sri Lanka. And in my research, I learned that this problem wasn't just limited to Thailand. It was all around the world, including Sri Lanka. And about 40,000 children were trapped in sexual exploitation in Sri Lanka. So I decided that I wanted to go and I wanted to meet the children. I wanted to hear their stories and ask them what I could do as a young person to help. And so when I was 17 years old, I went to my high school principal and asked if I could take 3.5 months off of school to go and travel to Sri Lanka and investigate the issue. And so I traveled to Sri Lanka, traveled around the country, meeting with children who were living and working on the streets, child survivors, NGOs, social workers, law enforcement, even government officials. And I wanted to kind of get an insider's look into the child sex trade. I really wanted to understand how it worked. And so I ended up partnering with the National Child Protection Authority, and they did undercover operations to rescue children and to catch child sex perpetrators. And so I ended up partnering with them in an undercover sting operation where I played the role of a 15-year-old girl. And that sting operation ended in the successful arrest of a child sex perpetrator. I came back to Canada and I thought to myself, you know what, there's so much more work to be done here in Canada. And as a young person, I would write to different organizations and say, I'm my name is Cheryl, I'm 17 years old. I'm so passionate about fighting for the rights of children and about this issue. And then I wouldn't hear anything back. And I was thinking to myself, this is an issue that's affecting children, but children don't have a role in fighting it. And so that's the whole idea behind OneChild. We are a rights-based organization, so we go according to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And basically the idea of the organization is to empower a youth-led movement against the sexual exploitation of children. And so what we do is we provide young people with the education, with the training, with the tools, and the opportunities to become leaders and to use their voice and raise their voice in actions against sexual exploitation and trafficking of children. So that was the kind of genesis of the organization. And so we were started back in 2005, and we've been going very strong. We were pioneers in Canada on bringing youth-led prevention education into schools and other youth spaces. So that's just some of the work that we do. I can talk a little bit more about our program in schools, but that's kind of the genesis of OneChild.
Okay, thank you so much, Cheryl. What an inspiring story. So there's one question that was not answered, and it's about Aurora House. Does Aurora House help boys? Shankari.
I saw that question coming in. I would suggest please call our number. We have posted the number there, and we can provide services because I cannot give you a direct answer right now, depending on what is your need. So please call us. Definitely we can provide services. We know how to help you and how to navigate this system and to get resources and help. Please call us and we will let you know the information. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry,
yes,
if I can just add to that, because I think in the panel asked me something similar. So I've answered back in the chat, but just to vocalize it here for everyone, Aurora House offers transitional housing, regardless of gender identity. We have a process of referrals, so agencies often refer to Aurora House. So we're happy to share that information, and to echo Shankari's comment, contact the team at Aurora House to learn more about those services and how to access the transitional housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Shelley, stay there because I have another question for you, and it's in terms of the stigma. We all know that it's very important to deal with people who are trafficked, but it is equally important to focus on the stigma attached to the issue and to those who are involved, especially related to survivors. How do we fight the stigma attached to the issue of human trafficking?
It's a very good question. Again, from the literature and the research point of view of things, it's well documented that there is a lot of shame and trauma involved, if I can use that language. But these aren't my words necessarily. This is, and again, referring to some of these studies, I'll refer to the GEMS project that I talked about earlier, from victim to survivor, from survivor to leader, and their program. And they explored, this journey, and they talk about how survivors are accustomed to being judged and stigmatized by their families, communities, institutions, even service providers, society at large. I think there's lots that need to be done, and there's lots that is being done. But I think maybe where I'd focus in on is creating spaces and places where those trying to create a life free of trafficking can feel accepted and supported as they are. That idea of shame, and again, a very difficult word, but a word that is true to some of that lived experience. You know, that non-judgmental environment, I think, is the very first critical step in supporting transition, and having a very high importance placed on sense of self-worth, feeling of value, and being accepted. How to do that, you know, using the center's history and experiences, mental health supports are critical to transition. Transition is not linear by any stretch of the imagination, and there are many steps forward and many steps back, and having the support of you know, someone who has a mental health counseling background, I think is key, at least for the center in Aurora House, in ensuring that we take a trauma-informed lens to the work that we do, as well as, like I said, creating this non-judgmental place to remove those feelings of shame and to remove, and again, shame being, I keep using it, it's problematic.
No, but you are right. Shame is along the way, because it's hard to battle that for them. It takes a long time.
Very long time. So maybe, you know, Judy, maybe you could springboard off of my answer.
No, I was just remembering, I think Shankari remembers, I was last week, yes, she's not a resident at Aurora House, but a MNLCT client, external client, but she has been a survivor of human trafficking. She has been, yes, her own husband was the one, but every time she along the way she was disclosing her life story, I could sense the sense of shame along the way, like, you know, just you could sense in her words how shameful she felt, because she started working as a strip club. So that's why she said, I am to blame, right? So there is a lot to be done about shame, because she thinks that now it's like she's being punished, right? Like she started working at that club in her country of origin, but once she came here, lured by this guy who promised the land of dreams, and that she was going to be a...
Oh, I think Judith got frozen. Okay, so maybe we can move on. I'm mindful of the time, and I would like to go to Shelley and Cheryl to close this conversation. Sorry, Judith, we lost you for a minute.
Okay.
Thank you. So Shelley and Cheryl, what role should small and medium businesses play to mitigate or to decrease human trafficking in Canada? If there is one specific thing that we all as a society as well could do to support with ending this issue, what would that be? We can go to Cheryl and then to Shelley to close the conversation. Thank you.
I think one area is that we can be providing training for staff in these small and medium-sized businesses to recognize the signs of a trafficking situation. So in terms of sex trafficking, we're seeing this with airlines, we're seeing this with parts of the hospitality industry, but traffickers are not only going to those large establishments or using these large carriers, you know, so they need to trickle down to some of the smaller hotels and motels and things like that. So providing, I think in those type of businesses, providing some sort of training for their concierge or housekeeping staff, that kind of thing, to recognize the signs of a trafficking situation, as well as putting up signage with the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline in a very visible place. I think these are actions that these businesses can take.
Thank you, Cheryl. Shelley, and we have some other questions that if we have time, we're going to answer those questions. Go ahead, Shelley.
I would agree wholeheartedly with Cheryl that that education piece is key. You know, when the center started its journey, we looked for resources, and I think, you know, depending on where we all are on this call, on that journey of awareness, there are some amazing resources out there. So to echo, you know, Cheryl's indications of, you know, the hotline, or anyway, our panelists today talked about a number of different resources, but there are some documentaries out there that I would suggest. The Y Foundation, an international foundation, recently did a 5-part series called Why Slavery, and it touches upon a number of different modes of modern slavery, human trafficking across the world, not just here in Canada, and how prevalent it is at perpetrating a billion-dollar economy globally. So, you know, from a wide, large picture view, that might be a good place to start. And then, you know, to Cheryl's point, 100% in businesses. I've heard of work being done with organizations like Uber and Lyft, identifying, you know, they become the transportation mode of moving people from one exploitative situation to the next, and how awareness programs in businesses make the difference in frontline people being able to identify those pieces. So again, everything, it's not there's no panacea, there's no magic bullet. I think it's a lot of coordinated effort. And one last maybe thought, and again, nothing new or greenfield here for me, but echoing this need for coordination, you know, at all levels of government to fund this work. This work is so severely underfunded. I know that there are inroads being made, but the capacity of organizations, you know, I don't want to speak for OneChild, but definitely for MNLCT and Aurora House, there are moments where we feel like we cobble together the funding to do this work, and that we do it on the backs of the expertise of those in our organizations already. So, you know, my call to action is more funding needs to happen, because I hope we've imparted that there is important steps being taken at all different levels to combat and eradicate human trafficking, but there needs to be a coordinated, funded response at all levels of government, and then down to, you know, our frontline work to be able to deliver services. You know, we saw earlier in the conversation, you know, the gender-based lens around this, and Cheryl's talked about the multi-layered vulnerability. Well, all of us have kind of talked about this piece of it. You know, having those responses and having the resources to be able to identify and to respond helps disrupt the supply chain and helps to shift demand for those who are being trafficked.
Thank you, Shelley. I think we have a couple of more questions. Young boys being trafficked and brought to Canada, what can we do to support them once they are here? So maybe we can go to Cheryl.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Young boys from Africa being trafficked, what can we do to support them once they are in Canada?
I would assume that's for labor purposes. So maybe I'm not the best person to answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Shelley, what about you?
On the labor trafficking side, I mean, again, I go back to the various points of supports that exist within our community. Shankari touched upon some of those. You know, Aurora House and MNLCT sits at that one part of the circle of care, but there are agencies that advocate right off the get-go for those who've been internationally trafficked once they're here. We can put those names up into the chat and as a resource going out. The Toronto Counter Human Trafficking Network, and their website is an excellent place to start if you are suspecting that someone needs support after, while, during, after trafficking. So yeah, if we can send out, you know, maybe connections to the Toronto Counter Human Trafficking Network as a place to start to support those who might be coming overseas for the purposes of labor trafficking.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
And there is another question I read about, what about if if a parent thinks their child has been trafficked and the child doesn't want to report? So if it is a child, of course, we need to call Children's Aid Society, and they have a department of that, and they will deal with it, right? They will give support to that family, of course.
Thank you, Judith, for answering that question. We have a couple of minutes left. So maybe if we go around the table or the screen in this case, and just for a final thought, if there is something that our attendees today should leave with from this webinar, what would that be regarding you know, this fight against human trafficking? Can we start with Judith, then Shankari, then Cheryl,
yes,
and
okay, just keeping that kind of is not immune, like Shankari pointed out. And also keep in mind that traffickers are always looking for new ways to engage people into this. So social media is a way that people don't know much about it. And yes, they're always inventing and very creative. Yes, it's a shame, but that's what happens. So yes, so we need to be aware of all that.
Thank
and
you,
of
Judith.
course, as Shankari said, Aurora House, anyone who wants to know more about what the services we provide, they can contact us.
Thank you, Judith. Shankari, very quickly.
Yeah, I as coming from a community agency and Aurora House, parents, teachers, guidance counselors, look after the young people who are with you. Look for the signs. I want you to take at least 3 points, important signs, what we heard today. Take it back home, have a thought about it, look for that information and ask for help. Community agencies like us, we provide free services to anyone who have a question. Call us, come to our office, talk to our frontline staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Shankari. Cheryl?
Yeah, I think I'm going to just have to emphasize, you know, education. This is so important. It's the only way we're going to be able to traffic proof young people. And so, you know, if you are a parent or you are connected to schools and you'd like a presentation, we do them in person, but we also do them virtually now because of COVID. The presentations are usually, you know, 45 minutes long, where we talk about the scale and scope of the issue in Canada, the signs, recruitment tactics, how it affects boys, the role that young boys and girls can play in fighting this issue. And so, yeah, if you do want to have us come and speak, we also do training for teachers as well, and other staff within the school system. So that's where we really focus, is on the school. But we also speak to other youth organizations and youth spaces. So if you'd like a presentation that is run by a young person who knows how to speak to young people in an age-appropriate way, and in a way that's inspiring and engaging and fun for a dark issue like human trafficking, then you can, of course, contact us at OneChild.
Thank you, Cheryl. Shelley?
Thank you, everyone. I mean, all my fellow panelists here, you know, very eloquent in these closing moments. So I echo everything they have shared already. I think my last point would be in your own personal journeys, as you begin to think about the constructs of trafficking and how it's hidden in every portion of our community. It often starts with the why. It starts in many different places, but my 2 cents would be, start with why. Why does this exist? Why is it perpetuated the way it is? And there's some amazing resources. I've mentioned a few. I'm sure, in fact, I know we will share this as follow-up, those resources. But that education piece, it does start with every member of our communities being aware.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shelley, and thank you everybody for being here today, for joining this webinar. If you have topic suggestions or questions you would like to be answered in future editions, send us a note to our communications team at communications@mnlct.org. And to find more about the Ask MNLCT initiative and access recordings of past webinars, visit mnlct.org/askmnlct. Until next time, thank you.